what I wanted to do is talk to you and to share a bit of your story and strategy and also tactics of how you did it.
So back in 2012, we formulated what we wanted our new strategic plan to look like. And we had a prior strategic plan called Blueprint for Progress. And we wanted to build off the success of Blueprint for Progress and create Blueprint 2.0. That defined for us what our purpose was as a school system, which we said was to prepare globally competitive graduates. That consisted of two things. One, we wanted to make sure every kid had access to an effective digital learning environment. And so this was making sure that we worked on technology literacy, but also got our students to understand how to use technology to personalize their own learning experience. The second thing we wanted to do was leverage that technology to allow our students to learn a second language prior to graduation. And we knew we wanted to start that work in elementary school as opposed to waiting, like most school systems do, until middle schools. So when we said we wanted to go to do that work, the first thing we wanted to talk about was what do we want students to know and be able to do? So we planned for about 19 months to start our digital transformation. As a matter of fact, the first year of implementation was this year with devices. We started with last year a total curriculum rewrite, particularly in elementary schools, because we knew that was going to be an easier lift. Elementary school teachers are more open to change, they're more open to trying new things, but also we wanted our students to sort of drive the change in the school system as opposed to it being sort of something we just layered on to high schools or layered on to middle schools. So out of the work, we have 8 conversions. When I say conversions, if you go to our website, which is bcps.org/STAT, S-T-A-T, we talk about moving toward a digital space, meaning 8 different ways in which we do it. So there was a curriculum, it's just a curriculum conversion, which again is what we want students to know and be able to do. So we use the new Maryland College of Career Standards to actually write a curricula that was actually going to be accessed through a digital platform. The second part of that was an instructional conversion. So after we have clearly defined what we want students to know and be able to do, well-defined curricula, meaning quality digital resources, quality digital content, and then how do you make sure that we change teacher pedagogy in classrooms to where the instructional strategies were different? So knowing our kids have a device, then what looks different in the classroom when every single kid has that for teachers? And we actually started with the whole idea around a learner-centered environment, meaning that you should go into classrooms and the kid owns the classroom to where it could be anywhere in the classroom. You not necessarily know where the teacher is. Students are so engaged in small groups and individual assignments to where the teacher is then able to use his or her time around small group instruction. The third one was this assessment conversion. We wanted to get away from paper and pencil tests. We knew that had to be a component of it because we were going to new assessments, but we also wanted to be more project-based. We wanted to be more interdisciplinary-based, cross-curricular based. And so we said, if we're going to get away from paper pencil tests, how do we leverage technology in order to be able to do that? And then give kids and teachers real-time information from formative assessments that will drive instructional decisions, not just tomorrow, but maybe in some cases the same day for young people. We knew there was a professional development conversion. So we knew that teachers and administrators had to be trained. That was obvious. We needed to make sure there was a STAT teacher in every single school, meaning a professional development teacher that worked hand in hand with their colleagues on modeling good classroom instruction based on a student-centered approach, but then leverage technology where appropriate. So it wasn't putting devices in the sake of kids' hands and they were going to be using it every single day, all day, every day. It was when it was appropriate, how do you use it to leverage a personalized instructional environment for them that was customized? And I'll talk to you a little bit about what that meant too. There was a policy conversion. So not just keeping students safe, but keeping employees safe too. And really, what does that mean when we have all this information out there and just the privacy that goes along with that, making sure our policies were updated? There was an infrastructure conversion. So in Baltimore County, I don't know how much you know about our school system. We have 173 schools, 110,000 students, and we have almost 19,000 employees. So out of that work, we had to make sure our infrastructure worked. Bandwidth was there. Wireless and broadband opportunities were available in every single school. And where PTAs weren't paying for, but we were doing that as a system. So it was about a $12 million investment that we had to make sure we leveraged so that every single school was on the same playing field. So when we asked teachers to turn this equipment on, it worked, and worked right the first time.
Now let me jump in there and just ask you a question, because that is a big jump for a lot of superintendents, is getting the bandwidth, getting the cables in, how to go wireless. And sort of tell me, just quickly focus down in on that. Like, how'd you do that? What carrier did you end up going with? How did you make that determination?
So we actually ended up deciding that we had to do an assessment of all of our facilities. What was their readiness availability, not just on the teacher, meaning human resource side, but also on the broadband side. So we had actually gone to a new model, and I apologize, I don't know necessarily the carrier right now, I can get that for you. But we had gone to a new model in terms of what our new construction would look like, meaning that regardless of where you were in the building, we did an assessment to figure out how many wireless routers we needed. So you go into our classrooms now, every single classroom has its own router. You go into our cafeterias, we have in some cases 2 routers in cafeterias, just depending on the size of the school and how many lunch shifts that school may actually have. So we wanted to make sure that regardless of the school, there was the appropriate number of wireless routers across the entire spectrum, so that regardless of the time of day, every single kid could have access to it. And from a district-wide perspective, we can adjust the broadband at every single school if we need to sort of increase it for certain schools depending on what they're doing. And we can monitor to make sure that kids, see what kids are doing with it. Is it the fact that kids are on Netflix, or kids are on doing something else and they're streaming as opposed to actually streaming the wrong type of material as opposed to what they should? We can monitor for that and control for that as well too. Again, I can follow back up to you in terms of the type of carrier that we ended up going with. But we actually used the ed specs that we had for our new construction for schools that were built from 2011 on up.
How important is beginning with strategy and sort of creating an architecture for where each part of the transition is going to happen?
So anytime in leadership, leaders have to start with, based on the goal that you and your organization has defined for yourselves, what's the strategic strategy in order to get that goal accomplished or get that goal, that objective achieved? For us, again, it went back to the goal of how do we prepare every kid to be globally competitive and globally prepared. We defined the 2 things we thought needed to occur, and at that point, it was all around strategy. And again, these 8 different conversions that we talk about, one being communication conversion as well too, making sure our community knew why we were doing this, the reality behind the challenge we were going to be facing, but also why was it so important at this particular moment to go this particular route for our kids. That was all part of the strategy. For us, we took about 18 months to just strategically plan for what we wanted to do. So a year and a half, all planning, talking to our community about, again, what we saw as opportunities, what we saw as things that we were going to have to sort of grow together on, being very, very honest and deliberate with them. And based on that, we came up with a plan to where we said, we're going to start slow in order to go fast. And from that work, we started with just this year with 10 lighthouse schools. Lighthouse schools are 10 schools within Baltimore County at the elementary level, where we took our newly defined curricula, and where we said in grades 1, 2, and 3, kids would access that curricula through devices. And so from that, it wasn't just the principal saying, I want to be a lighthouse school. Principals had to say, there was an interview with me and assistant superintendents. The academic team got involved. What I really liked is that you had to survey your teachers and survey your community. And at least 80% of your teachers and 80% of your community had to be on board to become a lighthouse school. These 10 schools have literally been beacons and in areas where they're laboratory schools. We've been able to bring elementary, middle, and high schools to these schools all throughout the school year. And they've helped us pave the way as we bring the remaining elementary schools, which is a heavy lift. There are 98 additional elementary schools we're going to be bringing online next year in grades 1, 2, and 3 only. In these 10 lighthouse schools, we're going to be making them K-5. So it wasn't for us just focusing on a certain grade. This was going to be pre-K through 5 for us. And then what's really exciting is folks will come to our elementary schools and say, we like what you're doing, but how does this really work at middle schools and work at high schools? So we're going to have 7 middle school lighthouse schools next year. And the beauty behind the middle school lighthouse schools is we're not doing grades 6 through 8. Again, this wasn't about just putting devices in the hands of kids. We're focusing on grade 6 only. So our middle school lighthouse schools next year is going to be grade 6 only, but we're really, really concerned in Baltimore County about how do we really change the trajectory for kids as they transition from 5th to 6th grade. So we're going to have 6th grade only in our 7 middle school lighthouse schools next year.
What LMS are you using with those lighthouse schools? And sort of what have you tested? Did you try several, or did you just decide on one and you stuck with one?
I believe that the platform that school systems decide to use is critical to any type of digital conversion. What I see with school systems across the country is that they have too many systems they try to operate. So the teachers may have to go to one system for the student information. They may have to go to another system to get all their data. They may have to go to another system in order to figure out how do they take a day off. Parents may have to go to one system for their child's grades and so forth. For me, I like to consolidate everything if we can. How do we make it a one-stop shop for everybody? While we know that there might be different vendors or service providers that are in the background, to the end user, it should be one system, one single sign-on. And so for us, we end up partnering with a group called Ingrade. Ingrade has a CEO, Zach Posner, who's a former Baltimore County graduate, graduated from Pikesville High School. Used to live in LA, has moved back to the East Coast to help us implement this. And so Ingrade is the platform that's behind the scenes. And for our student information system, because as we transition to BCPS1, which will be what I just talked about, that sort of one-stop shop, whether you're a teacher, a parent, a student, whomever you are, if you do business in our school system and you have your stakeholder, you go to this one system for all your information. Ingrade will be the primary platform for it. Ingrade really started with a gradebook. For our teachers, many of them had never done an online gradebook. And if they did, it was through the various companies. And then Infinite Campus will be our student information system as we pilot that for the 15-16 school year and ultimately roll it out system-wide for the 16-17 school year.
Something out there that a lot of superintendents and principals and teachers are talking about is using games in education.
In Baltimore County, we do a lot of gaming and game application for our kids in order for them to be able to master some of the concepts and materials and standards we want them to master. Probably the one of the best ones we have, and I've seen this is probably one of the best models across K-12, and I've been in thousands of systems across our country and in schools. I would probably say is at Chesapeake High School, we have sort of the virtual instructional lab, which was a partnership with Northrop Grumman, with Lockheed Martin. It's one of our good STEM academies that actually has about 5 academies within one school, and literally it's a virtual gaming simulator for kids. And I'm going to tell you, it's always a waiting list to get into where we need more. But we've been able to use that gaming concept for kids to be able to sort of master a lot of materials around math and science.
So that's a gaming software. What's it called?
We call it our virtual interaction lab. But we actually coined it ourselves. We actually built it in partnership with Northrop Grumman.
So you did a sort of build your own.
We did, but we have several. I'm gonna tell you where we've seen a lot of great work that's happening, and it's gonna be more going into next school year, is with our kids. So as we've been talking about STEM and expanding some of those opportunities to kids, we're also focusing on computer science and coding, where we want every single high school kid to take some type of computer science before he or she graduates. But we're starting that work in middle school with coding, with work that we're doing with code.org. And so our goal now is we have kids who are building apps. And so as those apps get built, they've been sort of dual platforms where they can work on Mac or Android. We've been able to sort of then work with our devices to make sure kids have access to those apps. So it's really phenomenal that our own kids are building apps based on the standards and material we have, and we're able to push it out to all of our students.
Can kids bring their own devices into the classroom as well and use them?
Right now we have some BYOD going on, but it's not much. It's probably 2 or 3 schools. When I first got here, I think it was more prevalent because no one could sort of see if there was a vision for technology for the whole system. For me, a lot of that was creating haves and have-nots. When you think about the size of our school system, again, 110,000 students, we have over nearly half of our students who qualify for free reduced lunch. So you have almost 55,000 students on that list. That's more students than are enrolled in DC public schools combined. So I don't want to create haves and have-nots in our community. We said we have this big focus on equity as a school system. Our board has adopted an equity policy. We don't believe in achievement gaps. So whatever we need to do to level the playing field, every single kid needs to have access and opportunity. So we said we're not going to confuse our teachers, because if you think about bringing BYOD, the only thing that's pretty much customary is internet and a calculator. We want to make sure that our kids have access to the same device, and our teachers have that same device as well to plan their instruction for kids.
I asked you what teacher-student systems you're using when teachers are giving assignments, homework, and getting that back from students. What system are you using for that?
Interestingly, the system that we're using for sort of teacher-student collaboration, for teachers to sort of set personalized learning experiences and tiles for kids, and for kids to submit assignments back, is Ingrade. We call it BCPS1 here because we're working a lot with Ingrade behind the scenes. But what's cool about Baltimore County, and if you have an opportunity to visit, definitely let me know, we'll make some things work, is that if a kid can go on to his or her own device, has their own username and password, they go into BCPS1, their calendar shows up. A teacher can push assignments out automatically to that student. The student then would see the assignments. That student could be in a 4th grade math class. That kid might be on a 5th grade math level. Nobody would even know. Their 5th grade math material that's pushed out to that kid. Or if they're on a 2nd or 3rd grade, they'll see that material because the teacher knows that kid. And in small groups, teachers can then re-emphasize or reinforce certain concepts or catch kids up if there's an intervention period that we've built into the day for that kid. And then if a teacher wants to get an assignment back from a kid, they use the BCPS1 platform in order to be able to do that.
So do you have classes where there's virtually no more paper?
We have a few like that, not as many as I want, to where students don't have to do any paper at all. But what I've seen this year, we've gone to sort of a centralized print management system, because teachers have to actually go and pick up something as opposed to being able to print in their own room. They have to go to centralized printers and copiers. I'm seeing less paper being used. Teachers have to put in their code. We can track, see how many copies are being made. And part of that was to figure out how can we leverage some of our savings, our cost savings for printing and paper, and be able to divert some of those materials and resources to our digital conversion. But also what I'm saying too is that teachers, because again, sometimes they don't want to walk down the hallway, they're actually telling students to turn those assignments back in virtually to them, and it's even faster for them to be able to do it, and they don't have to carry as much paper.
It's so interesting how you talk about that, because in the cities I've visited and the people I've talked to, the paper and the copiers and the printers is killing everybody's budgets, and it is a big deal to get paperless.
It is, and that's why I said I'm seeing it in a few schools, not as many as I want. I'm seeing it a lot in our 10 Lighthouse schools. I see it a lot in our other elementaries that sort of see the work coming to them in the future years. I think it's been sort of a statistic nationally that high school teachers, sometimes they want to print. But I think as we see the devices rolling out more and more to elementary, ultimately to middle, ultimately to high school, we're going to see less and less paper being used. And again, as we have our budget conversion, which is sort of our last conversion as we go throughout this movement, it's this whole idea around how do you redirect centralized resources to what it is you're trying to do. We're a large school system, so how do we leverage the buying power of a large, complex organization so that we get a better return on our investment when we actually buy paper, when we actually lease printers and copiers. Before I got here, principals were doing that work on their own. So as a principal, you were working to get your own copy of your printer lease. We said as a school system, we should be able to leverage that. We pay for it. That way principals don't have to spend their money on that, and we can actually get a better deal and redivert some of those resources to staff.
I know this could be a pretty little detail for you from superintendent level, but what are some of the most popular apps right now being used in these Lighthouse schools, and what's sort of hot? What are the teachers using? Are you getting feedback on what's popular, what's working with the kids?
So when I talk to teachers and kids right now, there's a lot of buzz of what we're doing around just digital content in general, not necessarily apps, but digital content. We do a lot of work with NBC Learn, a lot of work with Discovery Ed, with PBS Kids, with KidZoo. We do a lot of work with making sure that we have some of those sort of kid-friendly websites and apps out there. But I'm hearing a lot around PBS Kids, a lot of work around discovery boards that kids are using. But in terms of it being individual apps, I'm not seeing that as much because, again, we're sort of getting into the space now to where we've gotten the devices in schools. We've been able to leverage the digital content we're currently using. Next year, we're going to be exploring more and more around individual teachers and what they explore. And we're going to be then using BCPS1 to where if a teacher finds an app that he or she likes for a website, he or she likes, they'll be able to share that across the entire school system.
So let me just throw this out there. If you had a superintendent, he wants to get started, he sat down in front of you, you guys were having a cup of coffee, what do I do to begin a strategy? What's the first thing I look at? And then sort of how does it roll out for me?
So the first thing I'd be telling a colleague, whether they were in a rural district, an urban district, or suburban, in my background, I've worked in all three. I used to be an assistant superintendent in a district of about 4,000 kids. And so very, very rural in terms of how spread out it was. It was about 800 square miles, and we only had about 5 schools. So definitely I was able to sort of do some of that work with them. First thing I tell a colleague is you have to answer the question why. So if you can't answer as a leader why you guys are doing that work, it's going to be tough to be able to build a cause for awareness with your community. Because your community will automatically just think devices. They'll think devices in the hands of kids. And for many of your people, depending on your community, it might be a little skeptical. There are some communities out there who are a little skeptical than others. Those folks will automatically think about the harm that it might do. What if a student does this? What if a student does that? And you never want that to be the narrative. So if you can answer why you want to do it. Again, for us, it was about preparing our students to be globally competitive and prepared. That was just one of the ways that we knew we could do that work. The other thing is once you define it, you got to build with your community this idea around the awareness for why. So why is it important for your kids to have access and opportunity? Why is it important for your kids to have a level playing field regardless of the school they're in across your entire county or across your entire city? Communities like to hear from the superintendent on that. They like to hear about the passion that the superintendent bring to the field and what he or she can do, for that community. So once you know why, once you start building the awareness, you have to immediately go to two quick things. One, what's your staff's ability to be able to deal with the change? So what's their capacity? Can your teachers deal with it? Can your principals deal with it? And so there are plenty of assessment tools out there where you can assess the readiness to be able to adjust to such a change from your teachers, from your principal perspective. Because you're going to have to answer dual things. You're going to be dealing with your external community and your internal community. The other thing too is then you have to do your assessment of your readiness for your infrastructure to be able to make this change work. So again, if you build a cause for awareness around your community, your internal folks, everyone gets excited. They want to go on board. They want to say why. You figure out your folks can really deal with this. You want to make sure it works. So you got to make sure that you deal with the assessment of your infrastructure in order to be able to do it work, to be able to make it work. And so then I go back to once you built the cause for awareness, you answered why, you know exactly why you're doing it, your staff's assessed, they're ready to go, your infrastructure might be ready to go. What is it that you want students to know and be able to do through this? And that's that critical question of what does the curriculum look like that support a digital environment? And then for me, once those sort of 5 things are in place, it's keeping people updated communication-wise on where it is, looking at your budget, figuring out, how am I going to pay for this, whatever this is? Because some school systems have gone 1-to-1, some have gone 1-to-2, some have gone 1-to-3, some have gone BYOD. You have to answer that for yourself as a community. But regardless of what it is, you got to figure out how to pay for it. Regardless of the price, though, you need to make sure the awareness that you built the cause for why, all that stuff has to be in place, regardless of the model that you choose. Because at the end of the day, again, 18 months of planning, after 18 months, we have to figure out the device we're going to use. So ultimately, you got to have that conversation. And unless you know what the budget looks like, you won't know necessarily which device to use.
Thank you, Dr. Dance, for your time.